Welcome to the Zen Studies Podcast. I'm Domio Burke. Thanks, as usual, to new supporting members of the podcast. Julie from Columbus, Ohio, and Joseph from Gladstone, Missouri. Thank you so much for supporting my work. So, dana, generosity or giving, is the first Mahayana Buddhist paramita. Paramita is usually translated as perfection and literally means that which has reached the other shore. This shore being the world of suffering, and the other shore being the peace of nirvana, or complete spiritual liberation. In this first episode of 3 on dana, I give an overview of the Buddha's teachings on the virtue of giving. Now, these teachings are technically from before dana was defined as one of the paramis or paramitas, that is, perfections cultivated by someone on the bodhisattva path. In the next episode, I will begin discussing dana as a perfection, starting with the ultimate generosity portrayed in ancient stories about the Buddha's previous lives. And such stories inspired people to follow the bodhisattva path in both Theravadan and Mahayana Buddhism, so I will spend some time on the Theravadan paramis. Then I will move on to the Mahayana approach to dana, which, of course, focuses on the emptiness of the 3 spheres of giver, receiver, and gift, and an ideal that continues to be presented of complete selflessness. So note, I will be quoting many teachings in this series of episodes, and as I do so, I will mention the speaker or the text that the quote is from, but the full citation, including the source and maybe a web link and translator, you can find on this episode's page of the Zen Studies Podcast website. The importance of generosity in our practice. The 2nd century Indian Buddhist monk and Mahayana philosopher Arya Nagarjuna wrote, "Dana is the primary condition for the realization of nirvana." It makes sense that generosity would be the beginning of spiritual practice. It's the nature of human beings, or really of any sentient creature, to be focused on our own welfare or on the welfare of our close relatives and offspring. Central to our concern about our welfare is ensuring we have the resources we need to survive and prosper. Such resources include, of course, material things like food and water, shelter and clothing, but also extend to things like physical health, a home that is large and safe and comfortable enough for our family to live in without stress, a stable and dignified livelihood, enough wealth to ensure proper education and social status for our children, disposable income and leisure time for enjoying life. Generosity is where the journey to self-transcendence begins. This is why sharing is one of the very first virtues we teach to children. At first, they simply comply to please us, not being able to imagine things from another person's point of view. But eventually, you can see a child's sense of empathy develop, and the delight they experience when giving something they want to someone else and watching that person's joy. Of course, the child's own desires will constantly compete against their newly developing sense of generosity, but it's a beginning. Similarly, Buddhist practice begins with an aspiration to become more generous. And this is why dana is the first of the 10 Theravadan paramis and the first of the 6 Mahayana paramitas. The Buddha's teachings on giving. Given the way dana features in the lists of the bodhisattva virtues, it may come as a surprise that, at least according to the Pali Canon and other ancient Buddhist canons, dana isn't included in any of the central teachings of the Buddha. So this includes the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, 4 Brahmaviharas, 7 Factors of Awakening. The Buddha certainly praised generosity, but it was seen as a basic prerequisite to practicing the Dharma. As Bhikkhu Bodhi put it in his essay, Dana, the Practice of Giving, he says, strictly speaking, giving does not appear in its own right among the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, nor does it enter into the other requisites of enlightenment. Most probably it has been excluded from these groupings because the practice of giving does not, by its own nature, conduce directly and immediately to the arising of insight and the realization of the Four Noble Truths. Giving functions in the Buddhist discipline in a different capacity. It does not come at the apex of the path as a factor constituent of the process of awakening, but rather it serves as a basis and preparation, which underlies and quietly supports the entire endeavor to free the mind from the defilements. End quote. Generosity as an antidote to stinginess. The willingness to be generous can be seen as an antidote to stinginess, or obsession about our own welfare. Therefore, it's a basic prerequisite for practice. To his monks, who had already renounced the household life and all its comforts, the Buddha said, quote, without abandoning these 5 qualities, one is incapable of entering and remaining in the first jhana. That's the first level of meditative concentration. Which 5 qualities? Stinginess as to one's monastery or lodgings, stinginess as to one's family of supporters, stinginess as to one's gains, stinginess as to one's status, and stinginess as to the Dharma, or Dhamma. Without abandoning these 5 qualities, one is incapable of entering and remaining in the first jhana. With the abandoning of these 5 qualities, one is capable of entering and remaining in the first jhana. So if jhana is the first level of meditative concentration, being so wrapped up in self-concern that you're inclined to stinginess means you can't even begin Buddhist practice. And we know this, of course, from our direct experience. When we're preoccupied with potential threats to the abundance of what we want to retain, including wealth, material objects, time, energy, privacy, or status, we're unlikely to be able to settle deeply in meditation. We're unlikely to embrace the core Dharma teachings of impermanence and not self, and the renunciation of that which causes suffering. By practicing giving, we challenge our attachments and have a chance to experience the relief of stress that comes from letting go of self-concern. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, quote, "No misers go to the world of the heavenly beings. Those who don't praise giving are fools. The enlightened express their approval for giving and so find ease in the world beyond." End quote. The Buddha makes advice specifically to lay, that is, householder practitioners, emphasizing the importance of a balanced livelihood, saying, "A householder, knowing his income and expenses, leads a balanced life, neither extravagant nor miserly, knowing that thus his income will stand in excess of his expenses, but not his expenses in excess of his income." At the same time, the Buddha said there were 4 conditions which lead to the happiness and spiritual development of the householder in this life and the next: the accomplishment of faith, the accomplishment of virtue, moral conduct, the accomplishment of charity, giving, and the accomplishment of wisdom. So regarding the accomplishment of charity, the Buddha says, quote, "What is the accomplishment of charity? Herein a householder dwells at home with heart free from the stain of avarice, devoted to charity, open-handed, delighting in generosity, attending to the needy, delighting in the distribution of alms. This is called the accomplishment of charity." End quote. As we will see, Buddha's descriptions of ideal generosity can be very lofty. It might be useful to think of there being a spectrum between complete stinginess and complete open-handedness. There are usually limits on our giving if we're also going to look out for ourselves, our families, and our responsibilities. We'll always be navigating the best way to respond to the needs we encounter, trying to avoid the extreme of hoarding and paranoia, as well as the extreme of carelessly expending our resources to the point of, say, poverty and burnout. The benefits and merits of giving. The Buddhist teachings describe many benefits that can be experienced by practicing giving. In general, they mention many positive results you are likely to see in terms of your wealth and emotional well-being and social relationships. It's also said that if you practice giving in this life, you will experience benefits in your next life. The religious cosmology at the time of the Buddha included a belief in rebirth. So many people were concerned about the conditions they would encounter in future lives as well as in this one. According to the Anguttara Nikaya, there are 5 benefits of giving. A giver, a donor, is dear and beloved by many people. Good people associate with them. They get a good reputation. They don't neglect a lay person's duties. When their body breaks up after death, they're reborn in a good place, a heavenly realm. These are the 5 benefits of giving. In addition, this same sutta says that practicing generosity makes you a good candidate for Dharma teaching. Quote, "Giving, one is loved and follows the way of the good. the good, disciplined spiritual practitioners associate with you. They teach you the Dhamma that dispels all suffering. Understanding this teaching, you're extinguished without defilements." End quote. Notably, a person is said to benefit from their acts of giving even if their behavior is otherwise immoral and harmful. In another Anguttara Nikaya Sutta, it discusses the case of someone who breaks all the moral precepts, taking life, stealing, engaging in sexual misconduct, lying, etc. It says that if the person nonetheless, quote, gives food, drink, cloth, vehicles, garlands, scents, creams, bed, lodging, and lamps to contemplatives and Brahmins, end quote, then the repercussions of the person's harmful actions in terms of their rebirth in hell or the other lower realms will be mitigated. Because of their past giving, they have a chance of being reborn in somewhat more fortunate circumstances than they otherwise would have. The sutta says these immoral but generous people will be reborn among animals, but they will at least be provided with food and drink and various comforts. If you don't believe in rebirth, you can take this teaching to mean that even when you inevitably face the consequences of your harmful actions, your pain and difficulty will be mitigated to whatever extent you have also performed generous actions. This isn't a truth that's based on a belief in some kind of karmic justice machine that gives out rewards and punishments. We can appreciate this from our own direct experience. We may make mistakes and even break precepts, but whatever repercussions we face will be much less painful if we have cultivated a generous heart instead of a self-centered, stingy one. Clearly, although dana doesn't feature in and of itself in classic Buddhist teachings like the Eightfold Noble Path, it was seen in early Buddhism as a very important virtue. In fact, if the giver of a gift has a glad and bright mind before, during, and after giving, and the recipient is free from greed, hate, and delusion, or is just practicing to become so, a gift is then said to be endowed with 6 factors. In this case, quote, "It's not easy to take the measure of the merit of a donation thus endowed with 6 factors, saying it's just this much a bonanza of merit, a bonanza of what is skillful, a nutriment of bliss, heavenly, resulting in bliss leading to heaven, that leads to what is desirable, pleasing, charming, beneficial, pleasant. It is simply reckoned as a great mass of merit, incalculable, immeasurable." End quote. The Buddha also waxed eloquent on the benefits of giving, again without distinguishing between the value of overcoming one's own selfishness and any benefits that would accrue to giver or receiver. He said, quote, "Monks, if beings knew, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of selfishness overcome their minds. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared if there were someone to receive their gift." End quote. motivation and attitude when giving. The original Buddhist teachings emphasize that the results of giving depend on your motivation and attitude while giving. The Sapuri Sadhana Sutta promises that when a person of integrity gives a gift, at some point, wherever the result of that gift ripens, they will enjoy much wealth and many possessions. Additional benefits such as being handsome and inspiring, getting respect and good service from one's subordinates, etc. These benefits depend on the manner in which the gift is given. I say these 5, quote, are a person of integrity's gifts. Which 5? A person of integrity gives a gift with a sense of conviction. A person of integrity gives a gift attentively. A person of integrity gives a gift in season. A person of integrity gives a gift with an empathetic heart. A person of integrity gives a gift without adversely affecting himself or others. End quote. Now, presumably, a person of integrity would not be giving a gift simply because it would bring them, the donor, some future reward. So, if we set aside the matter of promises about specific results, the 5 recommended ways of giving a gift describe true generosity quite well. We want to be sincere and wholehearted when we give, not grudging. We want to be attentive, which will help communicate the spirit behind the gift and help us give appropriate things. We aspire to give at a good time, matching the gift to the situation and the receiver. We give with an empathetic heart, allowing us to feel compassion for the suffering of others and sympathetic joy at their well-being, as opposed to giving out of pity or with a sense of superiority. Now, the 5th one, giving without adversely affecting ourselves or others, is an interesting recommendation. This invites us to use wisdom in our generosity. It's easy to imagine situations where the benefits of a gift are outweighed by the cost of giving it, or where the giving will encourage dependency or maybe leave the receiver with a sense of obligation. Keep in mind that gifts aren't limited to money and material objects, but include things like time and energy and attention. Of course, too much consideration about whether giving will adversely affect self or others is likely to lead to stinginess. But the admonition to use discretion when giving gifts is certainly balanced by the way the teachings lavishly praise giving. The Buddha also said, your motivation for giving affects the results of the action. It's acknowledged that you might give a gift for many different reasons, not all of them noble. Among the reasons for giving that are listed in the Buddhist suttas are making it up to someone because you've insulted them, fear, a sense of needing to reciprocate because someone's giving you something in the past, and a desire to gain a good reputation. In one sutta, lay followers asked the Buddha about the results of giving that are dependent entirely on one's motivation, saying, "Sir, could it be that someone gives a gift and it is not very fruitful or beneficial, while someone else gives exactly the same gift and it is very fruitful and beneficial?" The Buddha says that this indeed is possible. He then describes the rewards of giving, different based on different motivations, in terms of rebirth in various realms when the body breaks up after death. Now, for each of the following 7 motivations for giving, the Buddha predicts rebirth in a heavenly realm. But in the Buddhist cosmology, there are many levels of heaven, and none of them last forever. So these motivations are listed in order of increasing, if you will, purity of intention, resulting in rebirth in higher and more sublime and refined realms. So 1, giving a gift as an investment, your mind tied to it, expecting to keep it, thinking, I'll enjoy this in my next life. In other words, there are benefits from giving even if your primary motivation is future rewards for yourself. After all, this may be the least pure form of giving, but the Buddha still says it results in rebirth in a fortunate realm. Motivation 2. Giving because you think it's good to give. Now, again, this is not a bad motivation. However, you could be adhering to a set of moral guidelines, more or less out of propriety, or maintaining a sense of your own goodness, rather than just sincerely cultivating the spiritual virtue of generosity. Motivation 3. Giving was practiced by your ancestors, and it wouldn't be right to abandon the family tradition. So, similarly, this kind of giving is great, but it's likely to be based primarily on a sense of propriety or maybe concern for reputation. 4. Giving because you have resources and someone else doesn't. So it wouldn't be right not to give. Now remember, this is considered a reasonably pure motivation, number 4 out of 7. But this motivation could include subtle feelings of guilt or shame, or maybe some measure of condescension toward the recipient of your giving. Motivation 5. Giving because you're inspired by the sacrifices of past spiritual people. Inspiration seems to be considered a qualitatively different motivation than just a sense of propriety. Motivation 6. Giving because doing so causes your mind to become clear and serene, and you become happy and joyful. At number 6 out of 7, this is a very pure motivation for giving. And yet there is another. Number 7, giving because doing so is an ornament and requisite for the mind. In this case, it's not that you don't delight in giving, it's that your primary motivation is spiritual. You give because it is conducive to practice. So the sutta says that giving with this highest motivation causes you to be reborn in the company of Brahma's retinue, Brahma being the highest of the gods, and that you will not be reborn into the lower realms again. And this means you would finish your training and attain nirvana in the company of the gods. So again, it's not necessary to dwell on the rebirth predictions in order to appreciate these teachings. To put it another way, cultivating generosity because of its effect on your mind, not even because it makes you feel good, furthers you on the path toward spiritual awakening and liberation. What you give and to whom. In addition to your attitude and motivation when giving, the Buddha's teachings address what you might give and to whom. In the Vacha Sutta, the Buddha says, quote, "I tell you, Vacha, even if a person throws the rinsings of a bowl or a cup into a village pool or pond, thinking, 'May whatever animals live here feed on this,' that would be a source of merit, to say nothing of what is given to human beings. But I do say that what is given to a virtuous person is of great fruit, not so much what is given to an unvirtuous person." End quote. Clearly, any gift results in merit, even a tiny one, or one given with imperfect motivations. However, it's stated repeatedly in the canonical suttas that the greatest merit comes from giving to virtuous people, and especially Buddhist monastics. And the stronger the monastic's discipline and renunciation, the greater the merit. Ironically, then, a particular gift gains you the most merit if you give it to someone with minimal needs and no sensual desires. The Buddha explained, quote, "When someone has gone forth from the home life into homelessness, no matter from what clan, and he has abandoned 5 factors and is endowed with 5, what is given to him bears great fruit." And which 5 factors has he abandoned? He has abandoned sensual desire, ill will, sloth and drowsiness, restlessness and anxiety, uncertainty. And with which 5 factors is he endowed? He is endowed with the aggregate of virtue of one beyond training, the aggregate of concentration, the aggregate of discernment, the aggregate of release, the aggregate of knowledge and vision of release of one beyond training. These are the 5 factors with which he is endowed. End quote. Gifts to monastics, of course, would be basic requisites like simple food, monk's robes, and basic shelter, not the vehicles, garlands, scents, and creams mentioned earlier as gifts you might make to lay people. The idea is that what resources you donate to support monastics supports the results of their practice, including spiritual liberation and wisdom, the continuation of the Sangha, and the availability of Dharma teachings. You might think of this as similar to the suggestion that the best gift you could give a child is a good education, as opposed to a bunch of material things. I mean, you might give material things or sensual experiences that will be thoroughly enjoyed, but then when they wear out or end or become less interesting or useful, what good are they? Whereas a good education, or in the case of this example of giving to renunciates, another awakened being in the world, these are gifts that keep on giving. Of all the gifts you can give, the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, that is Dhamma in Pali, is said to be the most beneficial. The Buddha said, "Monks, there are 2 kinds of gifts, a gift of material things and a gift of the Dhamma. Of these 2 kinds of gifts, this is supreme, a gift of the Dhamma." In another sutta he explained, quote, "A giver of food is a giver of strength, a giver of clothes, a giver of beauty, a giver of a vehicle, a giver of ease, a giver of a lamp, a giver of vision, And the one who gives a residence is the one who's a giver of everything. But the one who teaches the Dhamma is a giver of the deathless. End quote. If you aren't a Dharma teacher, can you give the gift of the Dhamma? Definitely. Dharma can also mean truth. And you can certainly demonstrate the truth to people without having to talk about Buddhism. In addition, while we rely on explicitly qualified teachers to help us stay true to the Buddhist tradition, instead of wandering off into a thicket of our own opinions, there's much sharing of the Dharma within a Sangha, a community of practitioners, that doesn't come from the teacher. You might demonstrate to a newcomer how to put their shoes straight, or you might embody compassion when dealing with a challenging situation. You might humbly share your own struggle and insights in practice with your peers. And simply by participating in and supporting a Sangha, you enable the Dharma to be taught. Giving is not enough. Despite the many benefits of giving, practicing this virtue without also practicing the Eightfold Noble Path will not result in the kind of spiritual liberation the Buddha was teaching. The Buddha cautioned one of his very generous and devoted lay followers, quote, "Householder, you have provided the community of monks with robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicinal requisites for the sick. But you shouldn't rest content with a thought. We have provided the community of monks with robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicinal requisites for the sick. So you should train yourself. Let's periodically enter and remain in seclusion and rapture. That's how you should train yourself." End quote. And by periodically entering and remaining in seclusion and rapture, he's meaning time in meditation and retreat. Particularly in cultures which believe in rebirth, like the Buddha's, it's common for lay devotees to make generous donations and accumulate merit with an eye toward good fortune in this and future lives. Clearly, the Buddha didn't say there was anything wrong with this, as he often described the benefits of giving in terms of rewards in this life and the next. However, notably absent from the lists of benefits from giving are spiritual attainments in Buddhist terms, such as insight into the Four Noble Truths, concentration, or the abandonment of hindrances like sensual desire or ill will. We achieve these things through other aspects of our practice: meditation, mindfulness, study, learning to renounce that which causes suffering. The limitations of concentrating primarily or only on the practice of giving is reflected in the fact that the suttas say it leads to fortunate rebirths, but not to the end of rebirth, which is a way the Buddha described the goal of practice. The point, according to the Buddha's teachings, is to free ourselves from the cycle of birth and death, which is driven by desire and karma. For those of us who don't believe in rebirth, or who are at least agnostic about it, we can look at rebirth as a metaphor for the way karma, behavioral cause and effect, manifests in this life. We may strive very hard to cultivate generosity and to give up our attachments to our wealth and material possessions and status, but our spiritual freedom will be limited until we awaken to the way desire leads to dukkha. and how we can release our dukkha by releasing that desire. Of course, practicing giving may help facilitate our awakening. So, generosity and the rest of the Buddhist path are meant to be practiced at the same time. So that's it for today. In my next episode, I will discuss the ideal of giving as it appears in ancient stories about the Buddha's previous lives, when he is said to have been a bodhisattva. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Theravadan parami of dana. Then I'll get into the topic of dana paramita in Mahayana Buddhism, including its relationship to prajna paramita, the perfection of wisdom, which is essentially insight into emptiness. I hope you'll tune in. Thanks for listening.